Section 1. The nature of the weapon. There is a moment, somewhere deep in the frozen dark between the stars, where a container drifts. It looks like a coffin. In many ways, it is one. Inside, suspended in the cold black silence of cryosleep, is something that was once human. It still has a human face, somewhere behind the pale gray mask shaped like a skull. It still has human hands, though those hands have been rebuilt, restructured, the bones reshaped and reinforced, the nervous system rewired for a speed that nature never intended. It still has a human heart, two of them, actually, because one was added surgically to handle what the drugs would eventually demand. And somewhere inside the chemistry of its blood, layered into the tissue and organs and every rebuilt inch of its body, there is an explosive waiting to go off. This is an Eversor assassin, not an assassin in the way you might be thinking. Not a patient, careful figure in a long coat who slips into a room, puts a single round through the right skull, and disappears before the body hits the floor. That is not what this is. The Officio Assassinorum has operatives for that kind of work. The Vindicare sits a kilometer away, in a high window, with a round chambered that can punch through ceramite plating. The Calidus drinks a liquid that reshapes her flesh into any face she wants, then walks right through the front door, wearing the enemy's identity. The venom laces the wine. The Culexus simply stands nearby, and the light goes out in a psyker's eyes. None of them are this. The Eversor is the Officio Assassinorum's answer to a very different question. The question isn't how to quietly remove one person. The question is, what happens when the rot has spread so deeply that removing one person doesn't fix anything? What do you do when the corruption has burrowed into an entire ruling family, an entire leadership structure, an entire planetary government? What do you do when you need to rip the heart out of something from the inside, loudly and completely, and in a way that leaves absolutely no question about what just happened and why? You send a destroyer. That is what the word means, in the old tongue that the Imperium of Man reaches back to, when it wants names for things it doesn't want to explain too carefully. Eversor, destroyer. The name is not subtle, and it was never meant to be. The Eversor Temple, one of the great hidden arms of the Officio Assassinorum, does not deal in subtlety. It deals in something rarer and in some ways more terrifying. Sanctioned, deliberate, total violence. Violence as message. Violence as doctrine. Violence as the only honest response to certain kinds of evil. The galaxy of the 41st millennium is a place where the line between deterrence and atrocity was crossed so long ago that most people have forgotten the line was ever there. Worlds swear allegiance to dark powers. Families that have ruled for centuries quietly begin financing raids on their neighbors and funneling resources to pirates. Planetary governors decide, for reasons born of ambition or fear or the slow creep of something whispering in the dark, that the Emperor's light is not so bright after all. And when they do, when they choose to turn away, the Imperium does not always have the luxury of sending an army. Sometimes the Imperium sends one person, but not all single operatives are the same. When the Vindicare makes his kill, there is silence. A distant crack of a shot, a body falling, and a leadership structure suddenly missing its head. Clean. Deniable, if you are creative about it. Contained. When the Calidus finishes her mission, the target is dead, and no one in the building may even notice until morning, if then. Again, contained. Surgical. The kind of thing you can pretend didn't happen if the political situation requires it. When the Eversor makes his kill, there is nothing contained about it. There are no quiet corridors afterwards. There is no possibility of pretending nothing happened. When an Eversor has been through a building, everyone who sees what comes next understands in their bones what it means. What remains behind is not evidence of a covert operation. It is a monument to a single, simple, terrifying truth. The Imperium of Man noticed what you were doing, and it sent its answer, and its answer was this. Picture the morning after an Eversor operation. The first guards who venture cautiously into the wing where sounds were heard, the creak of their boots slowing as they round a corner and see what is there. The way information travels from one face to another in the patrol, the color draining, the instinct to retreat competing with the duty to report, the subsequent investigation that reaches its conclusions and then files them in whatever archive holds things the Imperium has decided it is safer not to discuss at normal administrative levels. That is what the Eversor leaves behind. Not just a body count, a statement. And that statement does more work for the Imperium than most people ever realize, because it radiates outward from the operation long after the assassin has gone. It finds its way into conversations, into calculations, into the private moments of other people in positions of power who are perhaps considering choices that would put them on a target list. What they picture is what is left behind when the Eversor is done. The word assassin carries certain implications that are almost entirely misleading when applied to an Eversor. It suggests precision, selectivity, the artful surgical removal of a single element from a larger picture. An assassin, in the popular imagination, is someone who works quietly and leaves no trace. They are defined by minimum footprint, one death, then silence. The Eversor's philosophy runs in the opposite direction. The footprint is the point. The evidence is the message. The scale of what is left behind is calibrated deliberately to produce a specific emotional and psychological response in everyone who encounters it. The Eversor does not work to leave no trace. The Eversor works to leave a trace that is impossible to misinterpret or explain away. There is a line in the stated doctrine of the Eversor Temple, the Dictatus Eversor, that captures this with remarkable economy. Fear me, for I am your end. Not I am your punishment, or I am your better, or I am the Emperor's justice. Your end. The last thing in the sequence. The thing that comes after all other options have been tried or deemed insufficient. When the Eversor arrives, the sequence is over. So settle in, because we are going to go deep into the world of these remarkable, horrifying, extraordinary figures. Where they came from, how they are made, what they carry and why, how they are deployed, what they have done across the millennia of Warhammer 40k lore, and what it truly means to be the Officio Assassinorum's most extreme, most brutal, most devastatingly effective instrument of righteous terror. There is a lot of ground to cover, and it is worth every step. If you are watching this, drop a comment below and tell me where you are and what time it is. Morning, night, middle of the week, early hours, I want to know. And if this kind of deep lore is your thing, make sure you are subscribed so you never miss one of these. Now let us continue. Section 2. The Birth of the Officio Assassinorum. To understand the Eversor, you have to understand the organization that built them and why that organization exists in the first place. Because the Officio Assassinorum did not emerge from nothing. It was not some organic outgrowth of imperial bureaucracy that slowly developed over centuries of wars and politics. It was created deliberately, in secret, by one of the most powerful and trusted men in the entire early history of the Imperium of Man. The man's name was Malcador the Sigillite. If you know your Warhammer 40k history, you know Malcador. He was the Emperor's right hand, the Regent of Terra, one of the most extraordinarily gifted individuals that the human species had ever produced. He was a psyker of immense power, a statesman of almost supernatural patience and calculation, and in the great project of the Emperor's Crusade to reunite humanity under one banner and one rule. He was the person who handled the parts the Emperor could not officially be seen to handle. The Great Crusade was an extraordinary undertaking. Hundreds of worlds brought back into the fold, alien races pushed back or destroyed. Human civilizations that had survived the age of strife and darkness and terror gradually, often violently, being reintegrated into the growing Imperium. And at the head of it all, the Emperor himself, a being of such immense presence and power that his very existence shaped the course of history. But there were things that could not be done openly. There were enemies who could not be confronted with a legion of space marines without igniting wider conflicts, without triggering political consequences that would cost more than the direct confrontation resolved. There were traitors inside the growing empire itself, governors who smiled in the light and conspired in the dark, who accepted the Emperor's authority publicly while quietly maintaining connections to the powers they had relied on before the Crusade arrived. There were problems whose solutions required not conquest, but removal, not the annihilation of an army, but the ending of a person or a family or a structure of corrupt governance in ways that the Emperor's legions were neither designed for nor suited to carry out. There were also problems of scale and politics that made direct military action counterproductive, regardless of its tactical feasibility. A Space Marine Legion arriving in force to deal with a planetary governor announces the Imperium's involvement in a way that has ripple effects across every nearby system watching. Every ruler watching the outcome recalculates their own situation relative to the emperor's power. A quieter resolution, one that could plausibly be attributed to internal causes, preserved the Imperium's ability to manage multiple situations simultaneously, without each one revealing to every other potential problem that the Imperium was willing to act directly. Malcador understood all of this. He had the strategic vision to see not just the military dimension of the Great Crusade, but the political and institutional dimension of maintaining everything the Crusade was building. A million worlds, each with its own power structures and traditions and ways of understanding loyalty. Keeping all of that aligned with the Emperor's vision over centuries and millennia required tools that armies couldn't provide, and so, at a place called Mount Vengeance, he gathered 6 other individuals. He wore a mask, they wore masks. None of them knew the true identity of any of the others, and none of them knew that their leader, the person who had called this gathering, was the Regent of Terra himself. This was the founding meeting of what would become the Officio Assassinorum, and the 6 people who gathered there alongside Malcador would each become the first Director Primus of their own clade: Sire Vindicare, Sire Eversor, Sire Culexus, Sire Vanus, Cyrus Venenum, Cyrus Calidus. Those names were not their real names. They were titles, identifiers, the words that would define the character and doctrine of the killing orders they were about to build. 6 clades, 6 philosophies of death, 6 different answers to the problem of what to do when the Emperor's enemies needed to be removed without the Emperor's armies. The pact they swore at Mount Vengeance was simple in concept and enormous in implication. They would serve the Emperor's will from the shadows. They would hunt the enemies of humanity through stealth and subterfuge, and they would operate in such secrecy that even the Emperor himself would have only marginal awareness of their specific activities, because the whole point was to maintain what we might today call plausible distance. Their existence would only be known to a very few, their operations almost never spoken of openly, and their results often attributed to other causes. For decades after that founding meeting, the 6 clades went to work. They spread across the growing Imperium. They built their training facilities in locations so secret that even other high-ranking members of the organization did not know all of them. They developed their methods, refined their tools, recruited and shaped, and remade the individuals who would carry out their work. And they killed, quietly and with extraordinary precision, the enemies that the legions could not reach. Usually, in those early days, only a single operative was sent into the field, sometimes 3, if the target warranted it, and all 3 from the same primary clade to keep operational security clean. The clades were almost never mixed, almost never combined. The idea of a joint force, drawing from multiple clades simultaneously, was so far outside normal doctrine that it would take the greatest crisis in imperial history to bring it about. That crisis came during the Horus Heresy. But before we get there, we need to focus on one of those 6 founding figures, because one of them was different from all the others in a very important way. One of them, from the very beginning, built something that operated not through patience or precision or subtlety, but through something raw, more primal, more complete. His name, as much as any name can be attached to a figure so deliberately obscured by history, was Sire Eversor. And the clade he built was known, even among the other founding clades, for its brutality. Section 3. Sire, Eversor, and the founding of the clade. We do not know much about the individual behind the mask at Mount Vengeance, who called himself Sire Eversor. The records that survive from that era are fragmentary at best, and the Officio Assassinorum has historically been very good at ensuring that its founding history remains exactly as obscure as it wants it to be. But we know some things. We know the man was described even in his time as the foremost psychotic assassin of his age. We know that the doctrine he built for his clade was, from the very beginning, oriented not toward individual, precise elimination, but toward something closer to catastrophic disruption. Think about what that means in context. The other 5 clades were building frameworks around different kinds of stealth, different kinds of precision, different kinds of intelligence gathering, or psychological manipulation, or poison delivery. They were thinking about how to remove a single target as cleanly and quietly as possible. Sire Eversor was thinking about something else. He was thinking about what happens when clean and quiet isn't enough, when a single death doesn't solve the problem. When the enemy has dug so deeply into a structure that there isn't one head to cut off, there are 20 of them, and they all need to go at the same time before any of them can respond. He was thinking about fear as a weapon in itself, not just the fear caused by a death, but the fear caused by the manner of a death. The kind of fear that does not just remove the current leadership of a heretical movement, but makes anyone thinking about filling that vacuum look at what remains behind and quietly reconsider their life choices. He was thinking about the soldier who keeps fighting after they should be dead, the warrior who does not respond to pain the way ordinary humans do, the instrument that can be pointed at a problem and trusted not just to complete an objective, but to make sure there is absolutely nothing left of that objective when the mission is done. From those foundational ideas, Sire Eversor built his clade, and from that clade, over centuries and millennia, grew the Eversor Temple. The temple itself, in the 41st millennium, is located at one of the magnetic poles of Terra. This is significant in several ways. The polar regions of Terra are ancient, extremely isolated places, many of them buried beneath geological and structural layers that date back thousands of years or more. The Eversor Temple is not in the upper city, not in the gleaming administrative districts, not anywhere near the civilian population. It is deep, cold, remote, and very difficult to reach unless you already know exactly where you are going. This makes sense when you understand what they keep there. An Eversor Temple is not a place for polite visitors. It is not a place where inquisitors drop by for tea and a quiet conversation about forthcoming operations. It is, at its core, a facility designed to house things that are extremely dangerous even when inactive. The cryocrypts that line its depths contain operatives who cannot be safely allowed to simply sleep in a normal bed. They have to be kept frozen because the alternative is that they wake up, and when they wake up, they need something to kill. That something needs to have been very carefully identified and targeted in advance. Otherwise, the targeting is going to be whatever happens to be in the immediate vicinity. That is not an exaggeration. We will get into the specifics of what an active Eversor assassin's biochemistry does to their psychology shortly. For now, understand that the building which houses them at rest is designed around the assumption that what's inside it is a loaded weapon rather than a person. The temple's operational history in the 41st millennium is served by the Ordo Malleus, the arm of the Inquisition specifically tasked with fighting the influence of chaos and daemonkind. And there is a very specific reason the Eversor Temple is the Ordo Malleus's preferred instrument when things get truly dire. The Ordo Malleus has the Grey Knights for fighting daemons directly, Space Marine chapters for large-scale military operations, and a whole range of other tools for situations that call for various kinds of finesse. But when the corruption has worked its way into a ruling structure so completely that you can't tell the infected from the uninfected, when every member of a planetary government might be compromised, when the only safe option is to remove every single one of them simultaneously, that is when the Ordo Malleus picks up the particular instrument that Sire Eversor spent a lifetime designing. That is when they send an Eversor. The Ordo Hereticus also makes use of Eversor operatives, and for similar reasons. When heresy has spread through an entire organization's leadership, when there are too many successors waiting in line for the removal of one person to actually fix anything, when what's needed is not surgery, but amputation, those are the moments that define the Eversor's operational profile. An Eversor assassin rarely has a single target. That bears repeating because it is one of the things that most sharply defines this particular instrument from every other the Officio Assassinorum deploys. One target, cleanly removed, is the work of a Vindicare. One target infiltrated and eliminated from within is the work of a Calidus. But an Eversor is sent when the target is a concept, a structure, a chain of command, an entire room full of people who have made a collective decision that the Emperor's law does not apply to them. And the Eversor's job is to provide a very thorough and very final counterargument. Section 4. Making a monster, the selection and augmentation process. Now we get into the specific machinery of what an Eversor actually is, because the end product is not simply a well-trained soldier who has been given some unusual drugs. The Eversor assassin is the result of a systematic, layered, extraordinarily invasive process that begins with identifying the right raw material and then rebuilding that raw material almost entirely from the ground up. The selection process begins with identifying what kind of person can survive, what the Eversor temple is about to do to them, and also what kind of person has the underlying psychological profile that the temple can work with. And here is where things get immediately interesting, because the profile they are looking for is not the same profile you would look for if you were recruiting, say, a Vindicare. The Vindicare selection process looks for patience, precision, the ability to wait, the capacity for extraordinary self-discipline, and the ego strength to act without external validation. The Eversor selection process looks for something that, in any other context, would be considered deeply worrying. They are looking for natural hyper-violence, an inborn orientation toward aggression that goes beyond what normal training or trauma or battlefield experience produces. They are looking for individuals who already exist closer to the edge of what we might call controlled fury than ordinary humans, people for whom the baseline intensity of their emotional life is significantly higher, significantly more oriented toward physical response, significantly harder to regulate through ordinary means. This is not a coincidence. It is a design consideration. The temple has a very clear destination in mind for the person they are selecting. They are not trying to build that orientation in someone who doesn't have it, because the process they are about to subject candidates to is so extreme that it will either amplify what is already there or destroy the person entirely. They need someone whose baseline already includes something raw and useful that the temple can work with. There is also a genetic component to the selection. The augmentations that an Eversor undergoes are extraordinarily demanding on the body, and not every human physiology can handle them, even at the most basic level. The specific chemical cocktail that the temple uses, which we will get to in detail, is among the most demanding pharmaceutical regimens in the entire Imperium. The body has to be capable of tolerating it with the right modifications, and some bodies simply cannot be made compatible no matter how talented the Medicae adepts performing the work are. So the selection process is first finding people who have both the psychological profile and the physiological compatibility. Then, from that already very narrow pool, finding the ones who also have the broader qualities of awareness, adaptability, and capacity for tactical thinking that will make them effective rather than just destructive. Because an Eversor is not meant to be simply a rage monster. The rage is real, and the violence is extraordinary. But beneath it, there needs to be something that can receive a mission briefing, prioritize targets, navigate a complex environment, and complete an objective. The fury is the fuel. It still needs something to be aimed at. Once candidates are selected, the process begins, and it is extensive. The first category of modification is what might be called structural changes to the physical architecture of the body itself that make everything else possible. The endoskeletal restructuring is the place to start here. The skeleton of an Eversor assassin is rebuilt, not replaced with something mechanical, not entirely, but restructured, reinforced, reshaped in ways that significantly alter the body's functional capacity. The skeletal system plays an enormous role in human physiology that most people don't consciously consider. It is involved in the production of blood cells. It distributes calcium and other essential nutrients to body tissues. The strength limits of ordinary human muscle, the moment where the nervous system tells the body that it is about to damage itself and must stop, are substantially determined by what the skeletal structure can bear. When you restructure that skeleton, when you reinforce it and reshape it to bear far greater forces, you change those limits. The body can now sustain forces, accelerations, impacts, and sustained physical effort that would break an ordinary human being apart. And this is the prerequisite for almost everything else, because without that reinforced structure, the drugs and the augmentations that come later would simply destroy the body they are meant to enhance. The adrenal system is another area of major modification. Adrenal ducts are implanted directly, fundamentally altering how the body's own chemistry responds to threat and effort. These implants are not just performance enhancers in the athletic sense. They accelerate the brain's higher functions in ways that allow the Eversor to process complex tactical calculations in fractions of a second, to read a room, identify threats, prioritize targets, and begin responding before an ordinary human's nervous system has even registered that something is happening. The adrenal ducts also have an additional function that reads almost like science fiction, even within the already fantastical world of the 41st millennium. They are able to feed the brain directly with nutrients under certain extreme conditions, which means that an Eversor assassin can, for brief periods, function in environments with no breathable atmosphere at all. They can operate in a hard vacuum, the void of space itself, for short durations. This speaks to how completely the normal physiological requirements have been rerouted and supplemented. A secondary heart is implanted. This serves multiple functions simultaneously. It helps the body cope with the cardiovascular demands imposed by the combat drug regimen. The sheer volume of chemically enhanced work the circulatory system has to do during a mission would overwhelm a single heart. It also provides redundancy. In combat environments where a single hit can end a mission by stopping the heart, having a second one means that the assassin's cardiovascular system continues functioning long enough to complete the objective even after taking damage that would kill an ordinary soldier outright. Brain implants complete the surgical picture. These chips are not passive devices. They actively interface with the assassin's mental state in real time, amplifying certain psychological states and suppressing others. In the context of an Eversor, this primarily means amplifying aggression and drive to an extraordinary degree. A mild dislike becomes burning contempt. Contempt becomes active hatred. The desire to serve the Emperor becomes something almost indistinguishable from suicidal determination. The chips are not generating these states from nothing. They are taking what is already there and turning the volume up to a level that far exceeds what human psychology normally allows. What the chips also do, and this is perhaps the most critical function from a mission perspective, is they help maintain the assassin's focus on the objective, even as everything else escalates. Because an Eversor in full combat is not a calm, measured presence, the psychology is closer to a storm than a scalpel. But that storm needs to be moving in the right direction, and the implants are part of how the temple ensures it does. The immune system is rebuilt to be hyperactive. And here we start to see the interconnected logic of the whole system, because this is not just about making the assassin harder to kill with disease or toxin. It is a functional necessity, given everything else that is happening inside the body. The combat drug regimen that an Eversor runs on is, by any objective medical standard, extraordinarily toxic. The amounts of these substances, the combinations, the duration of exposure under normal physiological conditions, this would kill a person quickly and messily. The hyperactive immune system is what allows the body to tolerate the drugs without the drugs destroying the host. It is a biological counterweight, a constant internal negotiation between the need to pump the system full of chemicals that push performance past any normal boundary, and the need to not actually poison the person you are doing it to. But there is a cost to this arrangement, and it is one of the most important and unsettling facts about what an Eversor assassin actually is. Because the drugs are so integral to the body's functioning, so deeply embedded in how the modified physiology has been tuned to operate, the assassin cannot stop taking them. The addiction is not a side effect. It is a built-in feature of the design. Without the drugs, the body begins to break down. Withdrawal from the chemical cocktail is not unpleasant in the way that ordinary withdrawal from ordinary substances is. It is fatal. The Eversor's rebuilt physiology has been so completely integrated with its pharmaceutical environment that the two cannot be separated without killing the assassin. This means that when the mission is complete and an Eversor has done what it was sent to do, it cannot simply be debriefed and sent home. There is no home. There is no ordinary life waiting on the other side. There is cryo-sleep, and then another mission, and then cryo-sleep again. The only alternatives are permastasis, which is used in cases where an Eversor becomes so dangerously unstable that even the temple's handlers cannot safely manage them between deployments or death. Those are the options. The Eversor lives in a frozen moment between one act of violence and the next, sustained by technology, kept in check by cold and darkness, waiting for the signal that means it is time to wake up and be what it was made to be. Section 5. The chemical prison combat drugs and the stasis cycle. Let us talk about the drugs specifically, because this is one of the most fascinating and genuinely strange aspects of the Eversor system, and it deserves real attention. The Eversor Temple uses a cocktail of 4 primary combat enhancement drugs. They are called Frenzon, Fury, Terminus, and Destroyer. Each of them does something distinct to the body and mind. Together, they produce a state that has no real analog in ordinary human experience. What they create is not intoxication in any recognizable sense. It is something closer to a fundamental rewiring of how the person experiences reality. Frenzon is probably the most broadly known of the four, partly because it appears in other contexts within the Imperium of Man. It is used on penal legion troops, for example, administered through Frenzon dispensers to produce desired combat effects in soldiers who are otherwise difficult to motivate through conventional means. In those applications, it is used at doses calibrated to produce altered mental states, a kind of induced aggression and suppression of fear responses that makes someone willing to advance into fire they would otherwise refuse. In the Eversor system, Frenzon is used at doses and in combination with the other compounds that make the penal legion application look like a very mild stimulant. The result on an Eversor's system is a state of aggression so complete and so consuming that it leaves almost no room for anything else. The speed enhancement it produces is extraordinary. The pain suppression is almost total, and the tunnel vision it creates on the objective is part of why the mission briefing data is fed directly to the neural cortex, while the assassin is still in cryosleep rather than after waking. If you tried to give an Eversor mission parameters after the drugs were fully active, you would have approximately no time to do so before the mission parameters became irrelevant and the Eversor started creating its own. Fury is an illegal combat stimulant, even within the already very loosely regulated pharmaceutical landscape of the 41st millennium. The name is appropriate. What it does is produce berserk fits of rage that escalate the aggression produced by the Frenzon to a level that most observers simply cannot process as something a person is doing. It strips away the psychological governors that ordinarily limit how completely a human being will commit to violence. Ordinary people, even in extreme situations, have internal limits. Something that says, enough, or stop, or this is too much. Fury removes those limits, not suppresses them, removes them. What remains is the pure, unfiltered drive to destroy the target, sustained at a level of intensity that the body, under normal circumstances, would not allow because it would damage itself in the process. The structural augmentations, the rebuilt skeleton and reinforced physiology, exist in part because they have to. A human body running fury at the doses an Eversor uses would tear itself apart. Muscles would rupture tendons from bone. The cardiovascular system would collapse. The hyperactive immune system would go into crisis. All of those things are managed by the physical modifications, which is why the augmentation work happens before the chemical conditioning is applied at full intensity. Terminus is a drug about endurance. It is the part of the formula that allows the Eversor to keep going. Not just physically, though it addresses the physical component, but in the more fundamental sense that it keeps the system from reaching the natural ceiling of what extreme physical and psychological exertion can sustain. An ordinary human soldier in an extreme combat situation reaches a point of physical and psychological exhaustion that limits what they can do regardless of motivation. Terminus works against that ceiling. It is not that the Eversor doesn't fatigue the body as still a body, and there are physical limits even to what the augmented system can sustain. But those limits are pushed significantly further, and the onset of exhaustion is dramatically delayed. A single Eversor can sustain combat operations for a duration that would be physiologically impossible for an unaugmented human. Destroyer is perhaps the most unsettling of the four, and its name tells you something about what the temple's designers were thinking when they created it. Where the other drugs enhance, accelerate, amplify, Destroyer consumes. It is the compound that most directly exploits the modified immune system, working in close relationship with the body's chemical balance to produce effects that would be fatal in any other context. It is corrosive in nature, and its presence in the system means that what the Eversor exudes physically, the sweat, the blood, these carry toxins. Contact with an Eversor in full combat is physically hazardous in a way that goes beyond the weapons they carry. Together, these four compounds create a pharmacological state that makes the Eversor assassin something that occupies a genuinely uncomfortable space between human and weapon. The person who went into the temple still exists, somewhere inside the architecture of the modified body. Their capacity for tactical thought is not eliminated, it is reconfigured. Their identity as a servant of the Emperor is not erased. It is amplified past recognition into something that sounds more like a consuming drive than a personal value. But the person, in the sense of someone with a personality and preferences and an interior life, is largely absent while the drugs are active. What is present, fully and completely, and with terrifying focus, is the mission. Now, we need to talk about what happens when the mission is over. Because this is where the stasis system becomes not just a practical solution, but an existential one. An Eversor assassin cannot wind down after a mission the way ordinary soldiers can. There is no period of decompression, no gradual return to a baseline state of alertness. The drug cocktail that has taken hold of the system does not fade on a normal timeline. The modifications that allow the body to sustain it also prevent the kind of natural metabolic processing that would clear ordinary pharmaceutical agents. The Eversor, post-mission, is still fully operational from a pharmaceutical standpoint. The aggression is still present. The drive to destroy the target is still present, even if the target has already been destroyed. The body is still running at the kind of intensity that makes it genuinely dangerous to everyone nearby. This is why the cryocrypts exist, not just as convenient storage for assets between missions. Though they serve that purpose, they are a necessity. The only way to safely transition an Eversor from the end of one mission to the beginning of the next is to return them to cryo-sleep. The cold stops the biology in place. The stasis preserves the body, keeps the drug levels from either clearing or escalating into a crisis, and holds the assassin in a state of suspended functionality until the next mission profile is prepared. The cryocrypts are distributed in hidden facilities across the Imperium. Some are on secret ships, drifting through space on pre-programmed routes. Some are buried in deep facilities on worlds that the Eversor Temple has maintained for millennia. The one in the Arctic region of Terra, the frozen polar zone of the homeworld itself, is among the oldest. This facility, buried beneath ice and stone, maintained by technologians of the Clade, who tend to the systems with something approaching religious devotion, holds multiple operatives in their sealed pods at any given time. There is something deeply strange about the existence these operatives live, if it can be called living. The cryosleep is not sleep in any meaningful sense. There are no dreams. There is no sense of time passing. A mission might end, and from the Eversor's subjective perspective, the next thing that happens is waking up for the next one, even if in objective calendar terms, years or decades or centuries have elapsed. The 40k lore explicitly acknowledges this. An Eversor assassin can have no idea how much time has passed since their last mission. They could be waking into a galaxy that is centuries older than the one they last saw. To them, it is as though only a moment has passed. They are completely disoriented in time, in a way that most humans would find profoundly distressing, except that the drugs don't really leave room for profoundly distressing feelings about anything that isn't directly in front of them. There is an additional dimension to this that appears occasionally in the lore and is worth noting. If an Eversor is placed in permastasis, a deeper and more complete form of the cryo process that is not reversible without significant effort, it is a sentence, not a mercy. The Eversor Tormentius was placed in permastasis for displaying what the temple's handlers described as erratic extremes of psychopathic behavior, which is a remarkable thing to say about an Eversor. This implies that even within the temple's expectations, there is a threshold of danger that some operatives exceed. Tormentius was later revived when a situation arose that required his particular capabilities, which tells you something about the calculus the temple applies to its assets. Even in permastasis, even sealed away, even the most extreme cases remain available options. This is what an Eversor is between missions: a suspension, a loaded state, a potential. And then the signal comes, and the cryopod begins its sequence, and what was a body in cold sleep begins its slow, precisely calibrated return to something terrible. Section 6. The Arsenal of Annihilation. Every Eversor assassin carries a specific suite of weapons and equipment, and each piece of that suite has been designed with the same philosophy that underlies the Eversor doctrine as a whole: maximum lethality, multiple threat categories addressed simultaneously, and the capability to keep killing even when circumstances change in unexpected ways. Let us start with the Executioner Pistol, because it is one of the more elegant weapons in the entire Warhammer 40k universe when you understand what it actually is. The Executioner Pistol is not a single weapon. It is two weapons in the same housing, a bolt pistol and a needle pistol, combined into one piece of equipment that can fire either ammunition type. This means that in a single sidearm, the Eversor carries both an explosive, armor-piercing round capable of dealing with armored targets and lightly fortified cover, and a neurotoxin delivery system capable of killing targets that the bolt round might fail to stop through sheer neurotoxic shock. The needle component deserves specific attention. The needles fired by the needle pistol portion of the executioner pistol are coated with a neurotoxin. Not a general sedative or a pain agent, but a lethal toxin capable of killing even extraordinarily large and biologically robust targets. The lore specifically mentions that the toxin is potent enough to kill a massive orc, which gives you a sense of the scale. An orc's biology is notorious for its resilience. These are creatures that can regenerate from severe wounds, that have physiology designed around the assumption that they will take enormous amounts of damage over an extremely violent life, and that have nervous systems sufficiently distributed that damage to any one part of the body is not necessarily lethal. Killing an orc with a toxin requires something extremely potent. The Eversor carries it in their sidearm as almost an afterthought. The Sentinel Array is a piece of equipment that functions as a bridge between the Eversor's augmented cognition and the tactical data that the mission profile has provided. It is a sophisticated sensor system, mounted on the assassin's body, that feeds information directly to the assassin in real time. It amplifies already extraordinary sensory capabilities. It allows for rapid identification of priority targets, even in chaotic, high-noise environments where visual identification might be compromised. And because it feeds to the brain directly, rather than to some kind of external display, it can be used without the assassin having to pause, look, or consciously process in a way that slows action. Think about what that means in practice. The Eversor enters an environment. The Sentinel Array is simultaneously gathering information about everything in that environment, identifying individuals by their priority classification in the mission profile, and feeding that information directly to the assassin's augmented brain. The drug-enhanced cognitive processing handles all of it in fractions of a second. The result is that an Eversor, moving through a complex environment filled with potential targets, does not have to make the kind of deliberate, slow decisions that an ordinary soldier would make about who to engage and in what order. The decisions are made almost instantaneously, at a speed that looks from the outside like pure animal instinct, but is actually a very fast version of precisely calibrated tactical assessment. The melee weapons are where the Eversor's design philosophy is perhaps most vividly expressed. The standard loadout includes both a power sword and a neurogauntlet. The power sword is what you would expect, an energy-sheathed blade capable of cutting through almost any material including heavy armor, powered by a field generator that surrounds the blade with disrupting energy. It is a devastating close combat weapon in the hands of anyone trained to use it. The neurogauntlet is something else entirely. It is a powered gauntlet fitted with long ejectors capable of penetrating almost any known form of armor, and those ejectors deliver a neurotoxin. Separately, the penetration ability alone would make the neurogauntlet a significant weapon. Separately, the neurotoxin delivery would make it a significant weapon. Together, combined with the extraordinary physical capabilities of an augmented and drug-enhanced Eversor, the neurogauntlet means that close combat with one of these assassins is hazardous in ways that go beyond simple striking power. The contact, the delivery of the toxin through the ejectors, the physical force of the blows. It is a comprehensive close combat system designed around the assumption that the Eversor will be making contact with heavily armored, physically dangerous targets. Then there are the melta-bombs, and this is where the Eversor's versatility becomes clear in a way that might not be immediately obvious from the description of a close, combat-oriented assassin. Melta-bombs are extremely powerful demolition charges designed specifically to destroy armored vehicles and heavily reinforced structures. They generate enormous heat, capable of reducing the armor of a tank to molten slag. An Eversor carries them for two purposes, both of which are perfectly in keeping with the doctrine. The first is the practical purpose: doors, walls, bulkheads, armored vehicles, anything that needs to be removed as an obstacle rather than as a target. The Eversor is going to complete the mission, and if the mission requires getting through 2 meters of reinforced steel to reach the next room, the melt-a-bomb solves that problem. The second purpose is more dramatic, and we will address it properly in the section on bio-meltdown, but the short version is that in extreme circumstances, a melt-a-bomb can be used as a suicide weapon, detonated deliberately by an assassin who has determined that the mission objective can be achieved through their own death if that death is timed correctly. The Sinskin body glove is the final major piece of standard equipment, and it is the one that most clearly acknowledges the contradiction at the heart of the Eversor's design. Most Eversor assassins enter combat wearing a specialized stealth suit, a reinforced Sinskin body glove with sealed pockets across its surface for storing weapons and other items. Sinskin is a material designed to enhance the wearer's ability to avoid detection by passive sensors: thermal, acoustic, chemical signature, electromagnetic. It is, at its core, stealth technology. And the Eversor is, in almost every other way, about as far from stealthy as it is possible to be. This contradiction is intentional. The Eversor approach to stealth is not the Vindicare approach or the Calidus approach, where avoiding detection is a primary mission parameter that influences every decision. For the Eversor, the Sinskin is about arrival. Getting to the target without triggering the alarm that would allow the target to escape or entrench is still useful even when what comes next will be anything but quiet. The Sinskin buys time and approach distance. Once the Eversor is on the target, the concept of stealth becomes entirely academic. Section 7. Deployment and the drop: how an Eversor is unleashed. There is a very specific and deliberate choreography to how an Eversor assassin is deployed, and the precision of that choreography is one of the things that makes these operatives so effective and so feared. The process begins long before the Eversor is aware of anything. When a mission is assigned, the selection of the appropriate operative is made by the temple's leadership, which, incidentally, is itself composed of Eversors. The Grand Master of the Eversor Temple is an Eversor, which raises some interesting questions about how temple administration works and what that looks like day to day. The lore is entertainingly vague on this point, but it does suggest that whatever the temple's internal management structure is, it functions since the organization has been operating continuously for 10 millennia. Once an operative is selected, they are transferred from their cryocrypt to a specially designed one-man drop pod. This transfer happens while they are still in cryo-suspension. They do not wake for the transfer. They are moved from one cold, dark enclosure to another, and the process continues around them. Inside the drop pod, neurolinks connect directly to the assassin's neural cortex. These links feed the mission data directly into the brain while the operative is still in cryo-sleep. The details of the mission, the target or targets, the location, the environment, the secondary objectives, any specific tactical constraints, all of this is downloaded into the assassin's mind before they are awake to receive it consciously. When they do wake, the mission parameters are already present in their cognition, as though they have known them for a long time. The timing of the awakening is precisely calibrated to the mission. The drop pod's automated systems begin the reanimation process at a very specific moment, when the starship carrying the pod has come out of the warp and is approaching the target planet. The reanimation is not simply waking from sleep, it is a carefully managed pharmaceutical process. As the body temperature rises and the cryosuspension releases, the drug systems come online in a specific sequence. The combat drugs that the Eversor requires are introduced to the system in a measured cascade, each one bringing the body to a higher operational state in preparation for deployment. By the time the drop pod reaches the surface of the target world, by the time it punches through atmosphere and impacts whatever it impacts on its way down, the Eversor inside is fully awake, fully operational, and already processing the mission parameters with a mind sharpened to an extraordinary edge. The door blows open, the cold morning air of some unnamed world rushes in, and something that was in cryosleep an hour ago stands up and begins its work. This element of the deployment, the speed of transition from inert to fully operational, is one of the key tactical advantages of the Eversor system. The enemy has received no warning that allows them to prepare. There is no period of approach where detection is possible and countermeasures can be arranged. The pod comes down and the assassin is already moving. The enemy's first indication that anything is happening is often the first sound of contact, and by that point, the mission is already well underway. The confusion that follows is not incidental. It is a core part of the doctrine. An enemy that is trying to understand what is happening to it is an enemy that is not organizing a coherent response. An enemy that cannot organize a coherent response in the early moments of an Eversor's operation is an enemy that will not organize a coherent response at all, because the Eversor does not give them time to develop one. This is the shock doctrine in its most literal expression. The terror induced by the sudden, overwhelming nature of the attack is not a side effect of the violence. It is a deliberate goal. The Eversor is not just trying to kill the targets. The Eversor is trying to ensure that everyone who witnesses what is happening, every guard, every aide, every attendant, every soldier stationed to protect the corrupt leadership, understands immediately and viscerally that they are not dealing with a conventional military encounter. They are experiencing the Emperor's personal response to what their masters have been doing. The psychological impact of that on those who survive is part of the operation's intended outcome. The targets are dead, but the survivors carry what they saw. And what they tell others, and what those others tell others, spreads the message far more efficiently than any press release the Imperium of Man would ever issue. Word of what an Eversor leaves behind travels. It finds its way into the calculations of other would-be traders, other families considering whether the rewards of financing pirates outweigh the risks, other governors wondering whether the Emperor's eyes are really watching. The Eversor doesn't need to kill everyone it might eventually deter. It only needs to kill the ones it was sent for. The ripple effect is part of the design. Section 8. Notable Operations and Infamous Acts. Now let us walk through some of the specific incidents from the lore that illustrate what an Eversor actually does in practice. Because the theory is compelling, but the specifics are where the true picture of these assassins comes into focus. We will start with one of the most remarkable and, in its own dark way, almost darkly amusing stories in all of Eversor lore: the slaughter of Clan Mackenzie. The world of Domroman VI in Segmentum Ultima was ruled by an ancient colonial family called Clan Mackenzie. The head of the family was the Grand Duke Fraser Mackenzie, and the Clan Mackenzie had a problem that they had perhaps not fully thought through when they began. They were financing pirate raids on neighboring worlds. They were paying for stolen goods taken from the rival mining worlds of Ruan and nearly there. This was, to put it mildly, not something the Imperium looked upon favorably. When this came to light, the Officio Assassinorum received a mission. And the mission was not to send a Vindicare to put a round through Grand Duke Fraser's head at a formal dinner. The mission was to eliminate the Grand Duke and all of his living relatives during their local festival, a celebration called the Grand Hootmame, a seasonal event held every summer at which essentially every member of the extended family would be gathered together. The Eversor succeeded. Every single member of Clan Mackenzie was killed, all 317 of them. The youngest was 3 weeks old. The eldest was 142 years of age. And here is where the detail that makes this story genuinely extraordinary comes in. At various points during the operation, when conventional weapons proved insufficient or unavailable for specific targets in specific situations, the assassin improvised. The lore records 2 specific examples of the improvised tools used to complete the mission: a silver soup spoon and a butter knife. Let that sit for a moment. 317 people. And when the conventional armaments were not the right tool for the specific situation, the Eversor solved the problem with whatever was at hand. Whatever was at hand happened to be the formal dinnerware of the feast. The mission was completed. Every member of Clan Mackenzie was dead. And somewhere in the historical records of the Officio Assassinorum, there is a mission report that notes, without apparent editorial comment, that improvised weapons, including a soup spoon and a butter knife, were employed. This story tells you something very specific about what an Eversor is and how it thinks, or rather, how its modified cognition operates under pressure. The mission parameters are not suggestions. They are the defining reality of the Eversor's existence during a deployment. The target list is not a preference. It is an absolute, and the means by which the list is completed are entirely secondary to the fact of its completion. When the conventional means are unavailable, new means are found. When new means are unconventional, the Eversor does not care. The mission is the mission. Now let us move to a very different kind of story: the Horus Heresy and the Eversor assassin known only as the Guarantine. The Horus Heresy, for those who need the briefest of context, was the galaxy-spanning civil war that nearly destroyed the Imperium of Man. The War Master Horus, the Emperor's favored son and commander of the Great Crusade, turned against the Emperor through the influence of the Chaos Gods, and took half of the Space Marine legions with him. The consequences were catastrophic and shaped everything that comes after in 40k lore. When Horus revealed his treachery at Istvan, the response of the Officio Assassinorum was unprecedented. For the first time in the organization's history, an execution force was assembled, multiple operatives from multiple clades, working together in a joint mission. The target was Horus himself. If they could kill the War Master early, the heresy might die with him. Among the operatives assembled for this first execution force was an Eversor clade member, given the operational codename the Guarantine. His real name was gone long, since replaced by Function. The codename referred to his origin, the Garant Span, an Oort cloud collective on the near side of the Perseus Null. He had been a natural psychotic from childhood, the lore records, and as a child had killed everyone on his home asteroid before he was old enough to properly read. The clade Eversor, when they became aware of him, had been, in the lore's words, delighted to take ownership of him. The Guarantine was an Epsilon Dan Eversor, the senior-most rank of his order. In the context of the execution force assembled to kill Horus, he was the most dangerous close combat asset available. He was also, even by Eversor standards, difficult to manage. The incident that occurs before the actual assassination attempt illustrates the unique challenge of including an Eversor in a joint operation. The Guarantine was being transported in cryosleep to meet with the other members of the execution force. He was accidentally awakened early somehow. The systems designed to keep him in suspension failed or were disrupted. The Guarantine woke up in transit, without a target, without a mission context, that his drug-flooded mind could process as complete, and proceeded to massacre his handlers, and then engage the other members of the execution force in direct combat. The Vindicary, Aristidekel, the Culexus Iota, and the others had to physically subdue an awakened Eversor, an Epsilon Dan Eversor. This is worth appreciating for a moment. These were the finest operatives the Officio Assassinorum had assembled, the best of several different temples, and it took their combined efforts to bring the Guarantine under enough control to have a conversation with him. Partial calming was eventually achieved through a combination of antipsychotic pharmaceutical intervention and the promise of an extraordinarily challenging target. Horus was, apparently, sufficiently interesting as a potential kill that even the Guarantine's rage could be oriented rather than suppressed. During the execution force's subsequent operation on the world of Dagonet, the Guarantine was somewhat loosely managed. He ran rampant, killing pro-Horus forces whenever he came across them, and the other operatives treated him somewhat like a barely contained force of nature that was useful as long as it was pointed roughly in the right direction. When the assassination attempt on Horus ultimately took place, the Guarantine threw himself into melee with members of the Sons of Horus Space Marines of the 16th Legion, superhuman warriors in power, armor, and killed many of them before being mortally wounded. In his final act, he sacrificed himself so that the surviving members of the execution force could escape. The Guarantine did not live to know that the mission had failed. The target they killed on Dagonet was a proxy, Luke Cedere, the Sons of Horus 13th captain, who had been sent to impersonate the War Master. Horus was elsewhere, the heresy continued, but the Guarantine had been, in his way, exactly what he was built to be. A natural killer who found his purpose, however brief, in the largest battlefield the galaxy had ever seen. The Taros campaign offers a more recent example and illustrates the Eversor in a more conventionally structured operation. In 998 of the 41st millennium, the Imperium was engaged in an effort to retake the mining world of Taros from the forces of the Tau Empire. Imperial forces discovered the location of the Tau Firecast headquarters on the planet and requested Assassinorum assistance through a priority astro-telepathic message. An Eversor was dispatched. The mission, designated Operation Deathblow, had two objectives. The primary was the elimination of the Tau commander, Shazo Rurmer, and the secondary was the elimination of the ethereal Envoy who was directing Tau operations from within the command center. The assassin's transport, the son of Jucha, successfully delivered the stasis pod to the Imperial flagship Righteous Blow despite a Tau naval blockade. From there, The drop pod sequence proceeded according to standard doctrine. The Eversor reached the surface, penetrated the Tau command center, and completed the secondary objective, killing ethereal Envoy and destroying the entire command center by detonating his melta-bombs, killing himself in the process. The primary objective was not achieved. Shazo Ramir had already moved outside the command center to lead his forces personally and was not caught in the explosion. One commander dead, one escaped. The command center destroyed. By the cold mathematics of mission assessment, Operation Deathblow was not a complete success, but the destruction of the Tau command infrastructure and the death of the Ethereal had real consequences for the campaign's subsequent development. This is worth noting because it illustrates something important about how Eversor operations are measured. The Eversor died, completing the mission. He gave everything the system had given him, used the most final card in the deck, and the secondary objective was achieved. The primary was not. In the grim ledger of the Officio Assassinorum, that result is recorded, assessed, and the next mission is planned with whatever intelligence can be gathered about the lessons learned. 6 Eversor assassins, deployed in 372 of the 35th millennium, massacred an abhuman blood cult called the Thugrock Goliath cult of Thugrock Secundus. 6 Eversors, 6, together, against a cult. There is an interesting question implied in the decision to deploy 6 of the Imperium's most extreme solo operators against a single target organization, and the answer probably lies in the specific nature of cult threats. A blood cult devoted to violence and chaos, with members who might not respond to the death of any one individual or even several individuals as a deterrent, may require the kind of thorough elimination that only multiple Eversors operating simultaneously could guarantee. These are not the only documented operations in the lore. There are others, scattered across the millennia of Imperial history, but they paint a consistent picture. The Eversor is deployed when the problem requires not a solution, but an end. When the rot has to come out completely, and when the manner of its removal needs to carry its own message to those who come after. Section 9. The Beheading. 100 Eversors versus 400 Space Marines. Of all the incidents in Eversor lore, one stands apart for sheer scale and implication. It is called the Beheading, and it took place in 546 of the 32nd millennium. It is the event that most vividly demonstrates, in recorded Imperial history, exactly what 100 Eversor assassins can do to even the most formidable military force the Imperium can bring to bear. To understand the beheading, you need the context of what came immediately before it. The War of the Beast was a catastrophe. The most powerful orc force in recorded Imperial history, led by a creature called the Beast, had launched an assault on the Imperium of such scale and violence that it threatened to undo everything the Great Crusade had built. Dozens of Space Marine chapters were annihilated. Entire sectors were ravaged. The Imperial Fists chapter, the inheritors of Dorne's legacy, and the backbone of Terra's defense, were reduced to a single Astartes. Thousands of worlds burned. The Imperium survived, barely. The War of the Beast was eventually won, at enormous cost, through a combination of military action and political maneuvering that required extraordinary people making extraordinary decisions under impossible pressure. One of those extraordinary people was Drakan Vangarich, the 12th Grand Master of Assassins of the Officio Assassinorum. A major figure throughout the War of the Beast, Vangarich had served as a genuinely invaluable political operative during the conflict, helping to coordinate the Imperium's response during moments when the normal mechanisms of government had completely broken down. He was brilliant, effective, and deeply, bitterly contemptuous of the political class he was forced to work with the High Lords of Terra, the most powerful individuals in the Imperium, outside the Emperor himself. Lord Commander Maximus Thane, the man who had commanded the final victory against the Beast, appointed Vangarich as Lord Protector of the Imperium before departing on a crusade to restore the Imperial Fist's strength. The appointment was meant as a temporary measure, a stabilizing presence, while Thane was away. What happened instead was that Vangarich, left alone with a body of High Lords whose incompetence during the War of the Beast had cost the Imperium millions of lives, reached a decision. In 546 of the 32nd millennium, Drakan Vangarich gave the order to kill the High Lords, all of them, in a single day. The operation was executed with the precision and totality that you would expect from the Grand Master of Assassins directing the full resources of the Officio Assassinorum. The High 12 were killed. Only Wienand, the inquisitorial representative, was spared. The lore implies that Vangarich's feelings toward her were personal enough to override his political calculations on that one exception. An Eversor assassin was personally involved in the opening moves of the operation. The fabricator General Kubik, head of the Adeptus Mechanicus, was assaulted in his palace, his entourage annihilated, before Vangarich confronted him personally with a choice between death and a very specific kind of compliance. Kubik chose compliance, deleting his own consciousness and surrendering his intelligence core to Vangarich's control. In the aftermath, Vangarich presented the assembled minor members of the Senatorum Imperialis with excuses for the absence of the High Lords, backed by impersonators to fill some of the empty seats. No one believed the excuses. Everyone was too afraid to say so. Vangarich unveiled hundreds of assassin bodyguards to roam the imperial palace, and the message was clear. He ruled. For the next 100 years, Vangarich administered the Imperium as a tyrant. By most objective measures, an effective one. Terra was refortified. The fourth founding of Space Marines was completed. The last remnants of the Beast's forces were swept away. He did the job. He did it through methods that the Imperium's governance structures did not sanction, but he did it. The only opposition to Vangarich in those early years came from an operative called Esad Wire, formerly known as Beast Cruel, who was one of Vangarich's own most trusted agents. Wire had disagreed with the scope of the beheading even as he participated in it, and when the full extent of Vangarich's actions became clear, Wire struck, attempted to assassinate his former master, the man he had come to regard as a father figure during his years in the Officio. The attempt failed. Wire was captured. And then, Drakon Vangarich did something remarkable. Instead of simply killing an agent who had betrayed him, he converted Esad Wire into an Eversor assassin. The former Venenum operative, with his plasteel reinforced fists and his barely contained ferocity, was remade. Whatever remained of the person who had been Esad Wire, who had been Beast Cruel, who had tried to kill Vangarich out of something approaching conscience, was wrapped in the machinery of the Eversor Temple's most extreme process. For 100 years, Wire served as Vangarich's instrument. And then, after about 80 of those years, Vangarich began to lose coherence. Unnecessary massacres, bizarre behavior, random purges that served no political purpose. The stability that had made his rule effective began to fracture, and Wienand still present, still watching, the one person Vangarich had spared, out of something almost like feeling understood that the time had come. Maximus Thane returned from his crusade and gathered a response force. The strike force assembled was enormous by any measure. 400 Space Marines drawn from 3 chapters, the Imperial Fist's 1st, 4th, and 5th companies, a full company from the Halo Brethren, and a full company from the Sable Swords. 400 Astartes, superhuman warriors in power armor, equipped for the assault on a heavily defended position. They fought their way through the Imperial Palace first. Other assassins were there, Culexus operatives creating psychic dead zones, Calidus assassins wearing the faces of the attackers to sow confusion, Vindicare snipers picking targets from angles that should have been impossible. Half the Space Marine force was lost taking the palace. In those early engagements, a Vindicare round killed the chapter master of the Sable Swords, Queblicus Amar, early in the fighting. But Vangarich was not in the palace. He had retreated to the Eversor Temple at Terra's North Pole, and he had taken his final reserve with him, 100 Eversor assassins. The surviving Space Marines, their numbers already significantly reduced, moved on the Eversor Temple. Vangarich, in what was either a final act of showmanship or a moment of genuine theatrical calm in the midst of everything else, flooded the chamber with supercooled methylon gas as the Astartes breached the temple and unleashed all 100 Eversors simultaneously. What followed is one of the most striking engagements in Imperial history. 100 Eversor assassins against the surviving Space Marines. The math is brutal. By any ordinary tactical calculus, Space Marines are among the most formidable individual combatants in existence. Their genetic modification, their power armor, their training, their weapons, all of this makes them extraordinary. A veteran Space Marine is a match for almost any individual threat the galaxy can produce. The Eversor assassins did not give the Space Marines ordinary tactical conditions. The temple chamber became a killing ground. The Eversors, fully active and in an enclosed space with live targets, moved at speeds that power armor cannot track cleanly, struck at weak points that years of study had identified, and took advantage of the chaos of 100 simultaneous combats to prevent the Space Marines from forming any coherent defensive line. And as each Eversor fell, its body began its biochemical cascade, the death explosion adding to the carnage, damaging the Marines nearby with the force of a detonating plasma warhead. When it was over, when the last sounds of combat faded in that frozen northern chamber, 3 figures remained: Vangarich, Maximus Thane, critically injured from an Eversor's attack and the subsequent death explosion of that same assassin, and 1 Eversor. 1 from the 100. Vangarich, in that final moment, ordered the surviving Eversor to kill Thane. 1 command to the last instrument remaining. The Eversor did not comply. The last Eversor was Isad Wire. After a century of being the Eversor Temple's most loyal and most extreme instrument, something had survived inside the rebuilt physiology. Some fragment of the person who had tried to stop Vangarich 100 years earlier, who had done so because something in him recognized that what was happening was wrong, had persisted through everything the temple had done to him. In the moment that mattered most, that fragment asserted itself. The hesitation was brief, just enough time for Thane to raise his bolt pistol. Vangarich asked, in what reads in the lore as almost conversationally calm, if they would like to know the story of how Konrad Curze died. Thane shot him. Of Isad Wire, the last Eversor standing in that chamber, the lore says simply that there was no sign. He was gone. Whatever he was, whatever he remained, he disappeared into the post-beheading chaos, and the historical record says nothing more about him. The aftermath of the beheading was a period of political instability that lasted nearly 2 more decades until something resembling normal imperial governance reassembled itself. And those 400 Space Marines who had gone into the Imperial Palace and the Eversor Temple, all but 1 had died. A single Astartes had survived. That ratio, 400 Space Marines against 100 Eversor assassins, with a single Space Marine emerging, tells you exactly what you need to know about what these operatives are capable of in their element. Consider what it means to be a Space Marine. The genetic modification, the implanted organs, the black carapace that interfaces with power armor, the centuries of training and active service, the weapons and armor that are among the finest the Imperium's Forge Worlds can produce. Every Space Marine is among the finest individual combatants the Imperium can field, and the chapters deployed against Vangarich were not fresh recruits. These were battle-hardened veterans, including the Imperial Fist's most elite companies, a chapter that traces its lineage directly to Rogaldorn himself and has maintained the highest standards of their Primarch across 10,000 years of warfare. 1 came out. That is what the Eversor Temple can do when it has full operational latitude in its own facility, with all 100 of its operatives active simultaneously. Every strategic and institutional planner in the Officio Assassinorum, every inquisitor with access to the relevant records, every chapter master who has been briefed on this incident, and others like it, carries that ratio with them as part of their operational understanding of the galaxy they work in. And it shapes, in ways both subtle and direct, how they think about what the Eversor Temple represents, and what it means to be the kind of enemy that warrants deploying 1. Section 10. What they leave behind the Terror Doctrine and its aftermath. There is a dimension to the Eversor's deployment that is easy to underestimate if you are focusing primarily on the operational outcome on the target list and whether it was completed. The operational outcome matters. But the Eversor's value to the Officio Assassinorum and to the Imperium extends significantly beyond the body count. What an Eversor leaves behind is a statement, and that statement persists long after the assassin has been extracted or died in the field. Consider what the survivors of an Eversor operation experience. Not the targets, they are not survivors, by design, but the others. The guards who were not on the target list, the servants who happened to be in the building, the soldiers who arrived too late to stop anything but early enough to see what was left, the officials of neighboring households who come to investigate why their associates are no longer answering messages. These people encounter something that does not look like a military engagement. Military engagements leave a recognizable kind of evidence: positions, lines of fire, the signs of tactical movement, and organized opposition. What an Eversor leaves behind looks different. It looks like something impossibly fast moved through a space and removed everything it encountered in ways that suggest both absolute purposefulness and complete indifference to what ordinary combat is supposed to look like. The psychological impact of this is not incidental. It is among the most thoroughly considered aspects of the Eversor doctrine. The Eversor Temple specializes in shock and terror tactics, and the shock is not just in the moment of the attack. The shock extends forward in time, through everyone who hears what happened, everyone who sees the evidence, everyone who calculates what it would mean for an operation like this to be directed at them. For those who hold positions of power within the Imperium and the Eversor doctrine, targets precisely those people. The knowledge that an Eversor can be sent, that the Officio Assassinorum has this option available, is itself a deterrent. You do not have to deploy an Eversor very many times before the implications of its existence begin to shape the decisions of everyone who knows about it. The lesson is not just for the targets. The lesson is for everyone adjacent to the targets. In this sense, the Eversor is, paradoxically, an instrument of governance. Not in any way that would be recognized by a political scientist or a constitutional theorist, but in the functional sense that it shapes the behavior of people in power. The brutality is the message. The completeness of the elimination is the message. The impossibility of hiding when an Eversor has been pointed at you, because cryosleep preserves operatives across centuries, because the Imperium's patience is essentially infinite, because the stasis pods are already out there, drifting through the dark. All of this is the message, and the message is very simple. It says, we know, and we will send one of these, and it will not stop until there is nothing left to stop for. The lore makes explicit reference to the psychological strategy underlying this. The sheer terror left behind in the wake of an Eversor's onslaught ensures that none will dare to oppose the will of the Imperium again. That word ensures is important. It is not hoped, not expected. The people who designed this system believe, based on millennia of operational experience, that what the Eversor leaves behind is sufficient to produce compliance in those who witness it, that the example is clear enough, that the message is unambiguous enough. There is also the specific question of chaos cults and gene-stealer cults, which the lore repeatedly identifies as scenarios where the Eversor is particularly valuable. The nature of these threats is such that the death of any individual member of the cult, even a leader, may not be sufficient to end the threat. Chaos corruption does not require formal leadership structures to propagate. A single corrupted individual who escapes the cleansing of a heretical household can carry the infection to a new host, and the whole process begins again. Similarly, with genestealer cults, where the biological component of the infection means that even a small number of survivors can rebuild an infestation over time. The Eversor's doctrine of total elimination is specifically calibrated to address this. The mission is not to remove the head of the snake. The mission is to ensure that there is no snake, no head, no body, no eggs, no possibility of regeneration. The completeness is the point. Section 11. Bio-meltdown. Even death is a weapon. Now we come to the most dramatic and perhaps most quintessentially Warhammer thing about the Eversor assassin, and it deserves its own space because it is genuinely extraordinary. What happens when you kill one? The short version is that the body explodes. The longer version is more interesting. The Eversor assassin's body is, as we have established, an extraordinarily complex biochemical system. The combat drugs running through it, the augmented immune system that keeps the toxicity of those drugs from killing the host, the modified physiology that has been rebuilt to tolerate and channel forces that would destroy an ordinary human body. All of these elements are in a constant state of dynamic equilibrium. The hyperactive immune system is continuously managing the chemical load. The body's modified organs are continuously processing, distributing, regulating. It is a system that requires the continuous function of the biological control mechanisms, the brain, the hearts, to maintain. When those control mechanisms fail, the equilibrium fails with them. If the Eversor's brain ceases to function, or both of its hearts stop, the immune system loses its direction. Without the regulatory functions of the higher biology maintaining its focus, The immune system can no longer keep the chemical load in check. And a chemical load that has been held at operational levels by an extraordinary biological management system, suddenly released from that management, does not simply disperse. It reacts. The chemicals accelerate their interactions. The processes that were being carefully regulated become unregulated. The energy that the body's modified systems have been channeling and managing suddenly has no management. And the result, in a body that has been rebuilt to contain the kind of force that the Eversor routinely wields, is an explosion, not a small one. The lore compares it to a detonating plasma warhead. In tabletop game terms, across multiple editions, the bio-meltdown has consistently been represented as dealing significant damage to everything near the assassin's body when it occurs. The Eversor assassins know about this. The lore makes this clear. Being well aware of this fact, they often use it as a last-ditch effort to eliminate their target or targets. This is one of the most remarkable things about the Eversor system when you think about it carefully. The assassin's own death is not the end of their operational effectiveness. It is the transition to a different mode of operational effectiveness. An Eversor who has fought their way to a primary target has been mortally wounded before completing the kill, and is now dying that Eversor has a final option. If the body is close enough to the target, the bio-meltdown will reach the target when the hearts or brain fail. The death becomes the weapon. The timing of the fall can be managed, in extreme circumstances, to maximize the radius of effect on priority targets. The Eversor can choose how to die in a way that continues the mission. The Taros campaign example illustrates a more deliberate version of this. The Eversor operating as part of Operation Deathblow, having penetrated the Tau command center and finding himself in proximity to a high-value secondary target, detonated his melta-bombs, deliberately killing himself and the ethereal simultaneously, and destroying the entire command center. That was a controlled choice, a tactical calculation made by an assassin who understood the value of his own death as an instrument and used it accordingly. There is something philosophically interesting in this, and it is not something that the 40k universe usually invites you to sit with, because the setting is generally not a comfortable place for meditation. But the Eversor represents a kind of total dedication that goes beyond even the extraordinary commitment expected of the Imperium's servants. A Space Marine gives everything to their chapter, and the Emperor. A Guardsman gives their life in battle. An Inquisitor gives their soul to the long war against heresy and corruption. The Eversor gives all of that and then, in death, gives the explosion. There is literally no circumstance in which an Eversor stops being an operational threat. When they are active, they are moving toward targets at extraordinary speed, with a full suite of weapons and a biochemistry built for violence. When they are killed, that biochemistry becomes one final weapon. The mission continues past the point where the individual ends. This is, depending on your philosophical orientation, either one of the most terrible things in the Imperium of man's long history of terrible things, or one of its most complete expressions of what absolute dedication to a cause actually looks like when it is built into a living person's biology without their ability to choose otherwise. The answer is probably both, and the fact that both can be true simultaneously is very much in keeping with the moral landscape of Warhammer 40k. Section 12. The Eversor among the Four Temples. Why brutal is exactly the point. We cannot fully appreciate what the Eversor is without standing it alongside its counterparts. The Officio Assassinorum in the 41st millennium maintains four primary temples: the Eversor, the Vindicare, the Calidus, and the Culexus, and understanding the differences between them is understanding why the Eversor's specific kind of brutality is not a design flaw, but the most deliberate and carefully considered aspect of the entire system. The Vindicare is what most people imagine when they think of an assassin, patient beyond ordinary human capacity for patience, capable of lying still in a sniper's position for days, sustaining vigilance through conditions that would break an unaugmented person's concentration in hours, trained to an extraordinary degree in marksmanship, in the reading of ballistics, in the understanding of how a single, well-placed shot can change the course of events on a planetary scale. The Vindicare's weapon of choice tells you everything about the philosophy: the Exodus rifle, a precisely engineered long-range system capable of firing rounds, specifically designed to defeat any type of armor or protection the target might have. One shot, one kill, often at distances that make detection and retaliation essentially impossible. The Vindicare is the definition of surgical. They are deployed when the problem can be solved by removing one precise element. When the target is an individual whose death will cascade through the opposition in predictable and manageable ways. When what is needed is not the destruction of a structure, but the removal of a keystone, in the expectation that the structure will do the rest of the collapsing work on its own. The Calidus is the architect of deception and transformation. Calidus operatives consume a substance called polymorphine, which has genuinely extraordinary effects on human biology. It makes the body itself malleable, capable of being shaped and reshaped into different appearances, different voices, different physical profiles. The Calidus walks into a situation wearing the enemy's face, speaking with the enemy's voice, having studied the target's habits and patterns until the impersonation is indistinguishable. They complete their mission from inside the target's own trust structure. The Calidus requires subtlety, patience, and an extraordinarily complex kind of cognitive flexibility. The ability to inhabit another identity so completely that the deception holds under close scrutiny. This is a fundamentally different kind of person than an Eversor, and the mission profiles they fill are correspondingly different. Where the Eversor goes in loud and leaves nothing standing, the Calidus ideally leaves the situation looking as though nothing happened at all, or as though whatever happened was caused by entirely natural internal factors, rather than external intervention. The Culexus is, in some ways, the most alien of the four, because the Culexus operative is fundamentally different from other humans. At a biological level, they cannot control and did not choose. Culexus assassins are psychic nulls, people born with the absence of a soul. In the warp's terms, individuals who register to psychers as wrongness, as a void, as something that should not exist. This pariah quality is deeply disturbing to psychically active individuals and to demons and warp entities. It makes the Culexus uniquely devastating against psychers, against chaos sorcerers, against any target that has a psychic dimension to their capabilities or to their protection. The Culexus is the specific answer to the specific problem of what to do when the target has warp-derived power. Now stand these three alongside the Eversor, and the distinction becomes very clear. The Vindicare, Calidus, and Culexus all work within certain parameters of mission scale, one target, or a defined and limited set of targets, a specific kind of engagement, a specific kind of problem. They are instruments of precision. The Eversor is the answer to what happens when precision is not what is needed, when the infection has spread beyond the range of surgical intervention, when there is no single keystone to remove because the entire structure has become corrupted, when you cannot walk in wearing the target's face because you would need to wear 17 faces simultaneously, when there is no psychic power to neutralize because the problem is not mystical, it is institutional, structural, and thoroughly, comprehensively human. In those cases, the Imperium needs something that does not share the other temple's fundamental approach of minimizing collateral disruption. It needs something that will walk into a problem and walk out, leaving nothing. No succession waiting, no secondary leadership, no one who can claim authority on the basis of being the highest-ranking survivor, no possibility of the infection reforming around a new center. The Eversor fills that need completely. And the reason the temple exists, the reason Sire Eversor built what he built at Mount Vengeance 10,000 years ago, is that anyone who has thought seriously about the problem of governance across an imperium of 1,000,000 worlds understands that this need will always exist. There will always be cases where subtlety is spent resources. There will always be moments where the rot has gone too deep for anything except total extraction. There is also a dimension of the Eversor's role that is less often discussed, but is implicit in everything about their doctrine. They serve as a reminder, not just to traitors and heretics, though that is the operational purpose. They serve as a reminder to everyone in the Imperium's power structures of what the consequences of certain choices look like when fully expressed. The knowledge that the Eversor Temple exists, that it has operatives in cryosleep right now, waiting for the next mission brief, that those operatives can be at any point in the Imperium within the time it takes a ship to travel through the warp. This knowledge is part of the fabric of how imperial authority functions. The administratum official who is contemplating a quiet arrangement with pirates. The planetary governor whose loyalty has been growing more conditional as the decades pass. The noble family that has been having interesting conversations with visitors from beyond the border. All of them, if they know anything about the Imperium's instruments, know that there is a category of response to their contemplated choices that has no negotiation, no appeal, and no warning. The Eversor is not sent as a warning. The Eversor is sent when the warning has already been given and ignored, or when the corruption is too deep for warnings to be useful. The four temples together form a comprehensive answer to the problem of enemies within the Imperium. Precision removal, deep infiltration, psychic nullification, and total structural elimination. Each is the best possible answer to a specific category of problem. Together, they ensure that no version of the problem goes without an appropriate response. And of the four, the Eversor alone is built to be a weapon that continues being a weapon past its own death. That specificity, that absolute commitment to function over self, is the clearest expression of what the Officio Assassinorum was built to produce when it decided that some problems required a solution that no other instrument could provide. There is also a dimension of deterrence that operates through the four temples collectively, rather than just individually. Any potential target of the Officio who understands the organization knows that it has multiple capabilities that address multiple protective strategies. Surrounding yourself with the best bodyguards money can buy does not protect against the Vindicare at a kilometer's distance with a round that will punch through personal force fields. Hiding your identity does not protect against a Calidus who has already spent months becoming someone you trust completely. Relying on psychic powers for protection does not protect against a Culexus whose very existence in the room neutralizes those powers. And keeping your corruption distributed across an entire command structure with no single point of failure, the thing that would make the other three temples struggle, does not protect against an Eversor whose entire doctrine is built around exactly that scenario. No defensive configuration addresses all four simultaneously with equal effectiveness. No level of protection makes the Officio Assassinorum's full capability irrelevant. This is not an accident of history or an emergent property of how the temples developed independently. It was designed in from the beginning at Mount Vengeance by a group of extraordinarily capable people who understood that any single approach to assassination would eventually be anticipated and defended against by sufficiently prepared targets. The only solution to that problem was to have multiple approaches, each covering the blind spots of the others, such that no one defensive philosophy could simultaneously protect against all of them. The Eversor is the element of that design that addresses the broadest category of target. Not the most heavily guarded single individual, not the most psychically protected opponent, but the most thoroughly embedded and thoroughly distributed corruption, the kind that has made the question of who is the head irrelevant, because the body itself is the problem. And it has been fulfilling this role, continuously and reliably, and with the effectiveness that comes from 10,000 years of operational refinement, since the day a masked figure in a cold mountain meeting in Terra's deep past first looked at the full scope of the problem and understood that some problems require a destroyer. Section 13. The philosophical weight, what the Eversor means in the 40k universe. There is a deeper question embedded in the existence of the Eversor assassin that the Warhammer 40k universe invites you to sit with, even if it never fully answers it. It is not a comfortable question, and the setting is not built for comfortable answers, but it is worth asking. What does it mean to build a person into a weapon so completely that they have no existence outside of function? What does it mean to select a human being for their natural predisposition toward violence, and then amplify and redirect and restructure every element of their physiology and psychology in service of a purpose they did not choose? What does it mean to build in, as a deliberate design feature, the impossibility of stepping away? To make the drugs non-optional, the cryo-sleep non-optional, the mission not something chosen but something the body itself demands? The Eversor does not retire. The Eversor does not have a life between missions in any meaningful sense. The stasis is not rest, it is suspension. The mission is not a job. It is the totality of what the system they inhabit allows. There is no Eversor who finishes a mission and goes back to a normal life, who has friends outside the temple, who wonders about the long term, who makes choices about how to spend their time. The drug addiction, deliberately, carefully, systematically engineered, ensures that the only frame in which an Eversor's existence is sustainable is the temple's frame. The Eversor Tormentius was placed in permastasis for being too psychopathically extreme, even by Eversor standards, later revived when needed. Esad Wire, converted from a Venom operative against his will as punishment for disloyalty, somehow retained enough of himself after a century of being an Eversor to refuse a final command in the last moment of the beheading. These two data points bracket the range of what remains inside an Eversor's rebuilt psychology on one end, something so consumed that the temple's own handlers find it too dangerous to deploy freely. On the other, something that persisted across everything the temple could do to it and surfaced at the most dramatic possible moment. The 40k universe does not editorially condemn the Eversor system. It never presents the Officio Assassinorum wringing its hands about what it has built. The setting is not that kind of place. The Imperium has made a calculation. In a galaxy where the enemies of humanity are endless and the window for hesitation is measured in lives and worlds, the tools that work are the tools that get used. An instrument this effective at this specific category of problem is too valuable to decline over concerns that belong to a gentler universe. But the setting does show you things. It shows you the Garantine, who was a child who killed everyone on his home asteroid and became an Epsilon Dan Eversor, and does not comment on what that childhood looked like or whether the person who committed those acts chose to become what the temple made of them. It shows you Esad Wire, who had something like a conscience, who exercised something like moral judgment, and was punished for it by being rebuilt into the most extreme form the temple could produce, and who, a century later, still had just enough left to not kill one man when ordered to. It shows you the cryocrypts drifting through space, and the technologians who tend them, and the matter-of-fact operational language of mission profiles and secondary objectives. None of this is an argument. It is simply the world as it is. The grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, includes the Eversor Temple as one of the things that the people fighting that war have built to fight it with. Whether you see that as tragedy or necessity or both depends on what kind of story you want to tell yourself about the universe you are engaged with. That ambiguity is part of what makes Warhammer 40k great. Not the violence, not the spectacle, not the sheer scale of the conflict, though all of those things are part of it. The moral weight of the choices the setting makes without resolving. The willingness to show you something and let you decide what you think about it. The Eversor Assassin is one of the most complete expressions of that quality in the entire setting. A human being rebuilt into a weapon so thoroughly that the weapon and the human are no longer separable. Deployed against threats so extreme that the alternative would be worse. Built on a foundation laid by a masked figure at a meeting on Terra 10,000 years ago, who looked at the problem of governing 1,000,000 worlds and said that some problems could not be solved quietly. He was right, and what he built persists. In the cryocrypts, in the drop pods drifting through the dark, in the mission profiles being loaded into sleeping minds that will wake into combat in hours, or days, or decades, or centuries, to find that the mission is what it has always been, and the target has not escaped. Section 14. The Eversor in the broader context. Comparisons, legends, and the weight of history. 10,000 years is a very long time. The Eversor Temple has been operating continuously across every era of imperial history that matters to the 40k setting, and the accumulation of that history gives the institution a weight that goes beyond individual missions or even individual operatives. Consider what continuity means at this scale. The founding doctrine, established by Sire Eversor at Mount Vengeance during the Great Crusade, has been refined and tested against every imaginable situation the galaxy has produced. The Horus Heresy showed what Eversors could do in the most extreme crisis the Imperium ever faced, even if the specific mission failed. The Age of Apostasy tested the institution when the Imperium's own internal structures turned corrupt. The Wars of Vindication required the Officio Assassinorum to rebuild and reassert its independence after a period during which it had been compromised by external political manipulation. And through all of that, the Eversor Temple maintained its identity and its function. Part of what makes this remarkable is the stasis system. An operative who was active during the Horus Heresy and placed in cryosuspension between missions could, in principle, still be an active asset in the 41st millennium if the temple had reason to maintain them rather than allowing their biology to finally fail. The subjective experience of such an individual, the sense of time passing, would be entirely different from objective reality. They would move through history not as a participant who ages and learns and changes with the times, but as a periodic visitor who wakes up, completes a function, and returns to suspension, each awakening into a galaxy that is older and in some ways more complicated, but whose fundamental problem, enemies of humanity that need to be removed, has not changed. In the 40k community, the Eversor is beloved in a very specific way. It is the character you point to when someone asks what Warhammer 40k is like at its most itself, a superhuman zealot. Rebuilt from the inside out by a secretive imperial agency, running on a cocktail of drugs that would be illegal in any other context, wearing a skull mask, exploding when killed. The response to the question, what does the Imperium do when subtlety stops working, is simply this. It sends this. There is genuine affection for the Eversor in the community that goes beyond the purely tactical assessment of what they can do on the tabletop, though the tabletop representation has historically been excellent at capturing the spirit of the lore. In earlier editions, the Eversor's rules included provisions for the charge bonus from Friends On, the spontaneous explosion on death, the ability to fire the executioner pistol 4 times, the neurogauntlet's devastating effects in close combat. In 10th edition, the character retains the core of what makes them special: speed, melee lethality, the ability to disrupt carefully positioned enemy units, and the death explosion that makes them a threat even after they go down. On the tabletop, the Eversor's tactical role mirrors its lore role with remarkable fidelity. You use it to disrupt, to force your opponent to position around the threat, to screen their valuable pieces, to spend resources, keeping the Eversor away from things they don't want it to reach. And even when it does go down, the Bio Meltdown gives you one last roll of those dice. One last chance for the assassin to be useful, even from the ground. The model itself, in its plastic form, is an extraordinary piece of miniature design. The dynamism of the pose, the assassin caught in mid-motion, accelerating towards something with every line of the sculpt, suggesting speed and violence combined with the skull mask and the body glove and the weapons held ready, creates a figure that embodies the concept completely. When you paint one, when you look at it on the table, it is very easy to imagine the cryopod opening, the door blowing off, and something like this stepping out into the cold morning air of a world that has just run out of time. Section 15. The Eternal Mission, a closing reflection. Somewhere in the dark right now, probably many somewheres, Eversor assassins are sleeping, not dreaming, not resting, just suspended, held in cold and silence, the biology carefully managed by systems that have been maintained and refined over 10,000 years of continuous operation. The drugs are in the system but not active, held at a level that sustains the body without pushing it into the operational state. The hearts beat slowly, both of them, the original and the surgically added second, maintaining the circulatory needs of a body that cannot simply stop functioning between missions the way an ordinary person's body could. The modified brain operates at a fraction of its awakened capacity, the implants quiet, the neural interface idle, the adrenal systems throttled back to the minimum that the rebuilt physiology requires to sustain itself. The weapons are secured, the body glove sealed, the sentinel array dark. It is completely still in there, behind the skull mask, in the cold of the pod. Whatever exists inside the modified architecture of the Eversor's mind during cryosuspension is not dreaming in any ordinary sense. The biological processing of the resting human brain, the consolidation of memories, the sorting of experience, the strange associative wandering that produces what people call dreams, does not apply in the same way to a system this fundamentally altered. There is simply a state, a waiting, a potential, coiled and ready, and requiring only the signal to begin its unwinding. The technologians who tend the facility walk their rounds in the blue-white cold. They check readings. They adjust parameters, measured in fractions of degrees and micrograms. They do their work with the care of people who understand exactly what happens if they do it wrong, and the care of people who have been doing this long enough that the doing of it has become something very close to instinct. Somewhere, a mission is being assessed. Somewhere, an inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus or the Ordo Hereticus has presented a problem that does not have a quiet solution. A planetary governor who has spent 30 years building a relationship with powers that no servant of the emperor should touch. A noble household whose financial records, when decoded, tell a story of piracy and murder and slow, systematic corruption of the systems around them. A cult that has grown into every level of a world's administration, putting friendly faces on positions of trust until the rot is too complete for surgical intervention to reach. Someone has looked at the problem and made the calculation. Someone has consulted with the appropriate authority, worked through the appropriate channels, obtained the appropriate sanction, and then someone has sent the signal. In the cryocrypt, something changes. The systems begin their sequence. Temperature rises slowly, carefully, each step calibrated against the physiological response being monitored in real time. The neural links activate and begin the data download, feeding mission parameters directly to a mind that is still, technically, asleep. The drug cascade begins, each compound introduced in precise sequence, building the operational state that will be needed when the pod door opens. By the time the drop pod hits atmosphere, the process is nearly complete. By the time it impacts, it is done. The door blows. The cold air of a world that does not yet know what is about to happen rushes in. The Eversor assassin steps out. The mission is already present in their mind, clear and absolute and non-negotiable, the way a heartbeat is non-negotiable. The target list is not a list in the ordinary sense. It is simply reality, the shape of what needs to happen next. The timeline has already collapsed to the immediate. There is no past and no future. There is the mission, and there is the motion that completes it. And somewhere on this world, people who made choices that seemed safe at the time, choices protected by distance and deniability, and the ordinary human conviction that consequences are for other people. Those people are about to discover that the Imperium of Man is patient in ways that individual human lifetimes cannot fully account for, that the eyes are always watching, that the silence between the stars is not indifference. The Eversor assassin is the message that needs no translator, the instrument that carries no ambiguity. The answer to the oldest question about what happens to those who choose to stand against the Emperor's light and believe that they are too far away, too well protected, too deeply embedded to be reached. They are never too far away. They are never too well protected. The Imperium always sends an answer, and some answers wear skull masks. Section 16. The temple between the mission's life and the facility. There is something worth spending a moment on that rarely gets discussed when people talk about the Eversor temple, and that is the day-to-day reality of what it means to maintain these operatives between deployments. The operational picture is dramatic: the cryosleep, the drop pod, the awakening into full combat capacity. But the maintenance of that system, across decades and centuries and millennia, requires an organization of people who are not themselves Eversors, who come to work every day in a facility that contains some of the most dangerous things in the Imperium, and who carry out their duties with a precision that the operatives they serve would destroy in an instant if the systems keeping them suspended ever failed at the wrong moment. The technologians of the Eversor clade are a fascinating category of person in the 40k lore. They are specialists, first and foremost highly trained in the maintenance of the biological and mechanical systems that keep the cryocrypts functioning at the precise parameters required. Too cold, and the cellular preservation fails. Too warm, and the drug balance shifts in ways that could trigger an awakening without the controlled pharmaceutical cascade that keeps the operative manageable. The margin for error in the parameters they maintain is narrow, and the consequences of errors in either direction are significant in very different ways. They are also, in a sense, keepers. Not guards in the ordinary military sense, because if a cryocrypt failed and an Eversor awakened without mission context, no guard in ordinary military terms would be helpful. They are keepers in the sense of devoted practitioners of a discipline that they treat as something very close to sacred, because they understand exactly what they are maintaining, and exactly what happens if they do it incorrectly. The deep cold of the Actic facility, buried beneath the ice of Terra's polar region, is their world between missions, and the humming of the cryo systems and the faint blue light of the maintenance panels is their constant environment. The relationship between the technologians and the operatives in the crypts is, by necessity, entirely one-directional. The operatives are not present in any meaningful sense while suspended. They cannot be consulted, cannot be communicated with, cannot have any kind of relationship with the people maintaining them. The technologians know their charges by file designation and physiological profile, not by personality or preference. They perform their maintenance on what are, for all practical purposes, exceptionally complex systems that happen to contain organic components. And they do this knowing that the systems they maintain will eventually wake up and go out and do things that the technologians themselves would never witness. There is a particular category of technologian within the Eversor structure who is responsible for the drug calibration systems. These individuals must maintain a detailed understanding of the pharmaceutical parameters of each operative's specific biochemistry. Because the modifications are not uniform, the drug tolerances are not identical across operatives. The specific cocktail balance that maintains one Eversor in proper suspended condition may differ in subtle but important ways from the balance required for another. Getting this wrong doesn't just mean the operative is maintained suboptimally. It means unpredictable and dangerous outcomes when the awakening sequence begins. The facilities themselves are distributed, as noted, across multiple locations. The Actic ISO store on Terra, the ships carrying stasis pods through preset routes, the deep ground installations on carefully selected worlds. Each facility requires not just technical maintenance, but security maintenance. The knowledge of their location is itself a resource that needs protection. An enemy who knows where an Eversor cryo facility is has very specific options available to them, ranging from attempting to destroy it to the more insidious possibility of compromising the maintenance systems in ways that would produce an awakening at a time, and in a context of the enemy's choosing rather than the temple's. The security of the facilities is another layer of the temple's operational requirement, and it is maintained with the same seriousness as the technical maintenance. The locations are known to a very small number of people. The access protocols are extensive, and the facilities themselves are built with defensive considerations that go beyond what an ordinary secure installation would require. What is inside them is not just valuable in the conventional sense. What is inside them is dangerous to everything, including the people trying to protect it. This background reality of the Eversor system, the maintenance, the technologians, the facilities, the ongoing operational requirement of keeping dozens or hundreds of extremely dangerous assets in workable condition across the breadth of an imperium spanning millions of light years is part of what makes the temple an organization of real depth beyond the dramatic stories of individual operatives. The temple is a living institution, continuously operating, continuously preparing, continuously maintaining its capability to respond when the call comes. It has been doing this for 10,000 years. It will continue doing it for as long as the Imperium has enemies that require this specific kind of answer. Section: What the enemy sees the Eversor from the other side. We have spent considerable time looking at the Eversor from the inside, from the perspective of the Officio Assassinorum, the temple, the operatives themselves, and the institutional logic that produces and maintains them. There is value in looking at this from the other direction, too. What does the Eversor look like from the outside? What is the experience of being on the receiving end of one of these operations? The answer depends significantly on when in the encounter you are asking the question. Before the drop pod lands, from the perspective of anyone who might be a target or who might be in proximity to a target, there is typically nothing, no warning, no intelligence that an operative has been dispatched. The cryosleep and the specialized transport vessels are designed precisely to avoid detection, and the awakening sequence is compressed into the period of the final approach, specifically to minimize the window during which a waking and active Eversor might be detected before reaching the surface. The first information that anyone in the target location receives about what is about to happen is usually the impact of the drop pod, and by then the window for useful countermeasures is measured in seconds. Those seconds are important. An organized defensive response, even a very rapid one, has a meaningful chance of slowing an Eversor not stopping, but slowing. Concentrated fire from a prepared position can chip away at even the extraordinary physical resilience of a fully operational Eversor, particularly if the fire is sustained and the defensive position is not one that the Eversor can easily flank or storm. The Eversor is not invulnerable. The lore includes incidents where chapter masters with exceptional combat capability have been able to defeat them directly. Gabriel Seth of the Flesh Terrors is noted in the lore as having fought and incapacitated an Eversor, and there are other examples of individuals of sufficient capability defeating these assassins in direct combat. But the key word in all of that is direct. In a prepared, defensive position, with organized fire and coherent tactical thinking, certain categories of opposition can handle an Eversor. In the chaos of an operation that has already begun, where the Eversor has the initiative and the environment is not configured for organized resistance, the picture is much more difficult. The psychological dimension of the encounter is probably its most important feature from the perspective of anyone experiencing it. The speed of an active Eversor, the obvious and complete disconnection from anything resembling fear or hesitation, the combination of tactical precision with absolute brutality, these produce an experience in observers that is qualitatively different from the experience of facing ordinary military threats. Military threats can be assessed. Military threats have patterns, have doctrine, have logistical constraints, have moments of hesitation that come from the human beings implementing the threat, trying to maintain their own survival simultaneously with pursuing their objective. An Eversor has none of those constraints. There is no moment of hesitation. There is no evident concern for self-preservation. There is only the mission, moving toward completion. The response this produces in people who witness it, even people trained to respond to violence, is documented consistently across the lore. It is not simply fear, because fear implies a continued capacity for rational assessment of options. What witnesses to an active Eversor operation typically experience is closer to a fundamental disruption of the framework in which they would normally make decisions. When the thing you are watching does not follow any of the rules that govern how violence is supposed to work, when it is too fast, too purposeful, too completely indifferent to what is being done to it. The ordinary decision-making structures that would normally guide response simply do not have appropriate categories to operate with. This is the paralysis the Eversor doctrine exploits. Not just the physical incapacity produced by casualties, but the psychological incapacity produced by witnessing something that the available mental frameworks cannot process into actionable response. By the time observers have assembled a response that their minds can execute, the situation is usually well past the point where that response would be effective. For those who survive, those who were not on the target list, those who were simply present in the environment, the aftermath carries its own very specific weight. They have witnessed something. Whatever they witnessed, they carry it with them in a way that ordinary combat experience does not fully produce. The specificity of the Eversor's operation, the purposefulness of it, the absolute clarity that this was not random violence, but directed and sanctioned elimination. This communicates to survivors in a way that shapes their understanding of what the Imperium is and what it is capable of choosing to do. And that, again, is part of the doctrine. The survivors are part of the operation's output. What they carry and what they eventually communicate to others is among the Eversor's most durable contributions to the Imperium's governance of 1,000,000 worlds. Section 18. The Future of the Eversor, where the temple stands in the gathering storm. The 41st millennium, in the current state of Warhammer 40k's storyline, is a universe in an extraordinary state of crisis. The Great Rift, the tearing of reality in the warp that occurred during the events surrounding Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade and the fall of Cadia, has changed the fundamental landscape of the setting. The Imperium has been literally divided in two. Warp travel is disrupted across significant portions of the galaxy. Chaos forces pour through the rift. The world has grown darker even by 40k's already very dark standards. In this context, the Eversor Temple's operational profile becomes both more valuable and more complicated. More valuable because the nature of the threats the Imperium faces in the post-Rift galaxy has escalated significantly. Chaos corruption is more prevalent. Heresy spreads more quickly. The disruption of normal communication and transport makes it harder for the Imperium to respond with conventional military force, which increases the premium on rapid, decisive, single-operative solutions that do not depend on the kind of logistical infrastructure that has been disrupted. More complicated because those same disruptions affect the temple's own operational infrastructure. The cryoships operating on preset routes through warp space face challenges that the Great Rift has introduced across the board for warp travel. The communication networks that would allow rapid tasking of deployed assets have been affected. The coordination between the Officio Assassinorum and the inquisitorial orders that sanction its deployments requires communication infrastructure that is now less reliable than it was. The Imperium Nihilus, the half of the Imperium on the far side of the Great Rift from Terra, represents a particular challenge. The Eversor Temple's assets in that region of space are, like all Imperial assets there, operating with reduced support and reduced contact with the central authority structures. The cryo facilities in that region maintain their operations through the institutional momentum of 10,000 years of protocols and the dedication of the personnel maintaining them, but the oversight structures that normally keep the temple accountable have been significantly attenuated. What this means in practice for the Eversor Temple and its operatives is something the lore has not fully detailed, and this is perhaps appropriate. The temple's nature is one of deep secrecy and operational independence. In the broader crisis of the post-Rift Imperium, its most extreme assets remain what they have always been: frozen in the dark, waiting for the signal, ready to step out into whatever world needs to be reminded that the Imperium's patience is not the same as the Imperium's inattention. The broader trajectory of the 40k storyline, with Roboute Guillemot's return and the Indomitus Crusade, and the various efforts to stabilize and reinforce the Imperium against the gathering pressures from all sides, creates a context where the Eversor's specific capabilities remain as relevant as they have ever been, perhaps more so. In a galaxy where the threats are escalating and the resources to address them with conventional military force are being strained across every front, the ability to put a single, extremely capable operative in proximity to a high-value target and let that operative solve the problem completely and decisively is not a capability the Imperium can afford to let atrophy. The temple continues. The facilities continue their maintenance. The technologians continue their work. And in the cold dark of the cryocrypts, the operatives continue their suspended existence between one mission and the next, carrying in their rebuilt bodies the doctrine that Sire Eversor built 10,000 years ago at a masked meeting on a mountain on Terra, ready to be the Imperium's answer to the kind of problem that only one kind of answer can address. That is, the Eversor Assassin, the most brutal instrument in the Officio Assassinorum's arsenal. A product of 10,000 years of Imperial resolve, built at the intersection of extreme biochemistry, surgical augmentation, and doctrinal necessity. A human being rebuilt into something that functions completely, that dies productively, and that leaves behind a message that no propaganda campaign could ever match. I hope this was worth your time. If you have made it this far, leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought. Tell me what you want to see next. There is so much lore in this universe that we could spend the next several years never covering the same ground twice. The Officio Assassinorum alone has stories that could fill 10 videos this length. If you are not subscribed yet, please do. Every subscription genuinely helps this channel keep doing this. And if you want to support the work, sharing the video costs you nothing and means everything. Until next time, stay in the dark. The Emperor protects.